and David. Hope your first day is going well. We are studying the laws of Kashrut. It's good to be back, at least somewhat. Not 100%, but we're gonna do our best. And those of you joining us online due to COVID or other issues, should realize we're in the middle of a series of classes on the laws of Kashrut. Every Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday we have 3 classes a week. They're short classes, but we try to cover some ground. And basically we've covered the first volume of the series on Kashrut by Rabbi Eliezer Melamed. And these, unfortunately, the volumes have not yet been translated into English, but from the Hebrew, we're working off the Hebrew, and we finished the first volume of the Laws of Kashrut last, I guess 2 weeks ago already, where we went through a lot of the Laws of Kashrut, mainly from vegetables, and that included a lot of laws of the land of Israel. We had a list. We talked about the rules of Chadash, Orla, Neta Ravai, Kilayim, both in trees and in animals. A little bit we discussed the laws. We talked about the Kilayim in plants, the forbidden mixtures in vineyards. Well, then we spoke about the requisite tithes before you can eat fruits and vegetables in the land of Israel. We said that it's actually harder to get kosher fruits and vegetables in the land of Israel than they are outside the land of Israel. When you're outside the land of Israel, you just pick up a fruit or some vegetables that grow in the ground and they're kosher. In Israel, they're not kosher until you take off the requisite tithes, the gifts that are supposed to be taking care of the poor. We went through all of those different trumot, maasrot, of different kinds of maaser. We spoke about the bikurim. We spoke about the how the mitzvah were done in the times of the temple and how they're done nowadays in quite some detail. We also spoke about the mitzvah of challah, that there's a special separation not only when you have the raw produce, but when you turn grains into dough, you have to take off a little piece. It's called challah. It's a little confusing because we also have challah on Shabbos, but it's not the same challah. It's a different mitzvah of challah. And there was other mitzvot connected to living in the land of Israel, where they apply, what's considered to be the land of Israel. We discussed that as well. Once we were on the mitzvah of connected to plant life and produce, so we spoke about the mitzvah of taking care of fruit trees. You're not allowed to cut down fruit trees, and from there you're not allowed to waste anything, just like you're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree because it would be a waste of the delicious fruit which God gave us. You're not allowed to waste other things. We spoke about the care we need to not violate the prohibition of Bal Tashchit. Finally, after discussing all those laws regarding plant life, we started to touch upon animal products. And we started to talk about the mitzvah or the permission of eating meat at all. Is it permitted to eat meat? And then we spoke about the mitzvah of tsar balei chayim, how we have to be careful not to cause undue harm to animals. In many of the modern farming techniques, we discussed the issues involved in those. That's what we concluded with. We actually, before that, discussed the mitzvah of a little bit, the mitzvah of which are the kosher animals, which are the non-kosher animals, fish, birds, etc. We even started to talk about the laws of shchita, the basics of the mitzvah of shchita, how to properly slaughter an animal, the mitzvah of kisui hadam, that some animals you have to cover over the blood. Soon we're going to discuss the mitzvah that you're not allowed to eat any of the blood and how we remove the blood from the meat. But that's the mitzvah of covering the blood is sort of connected to the mitzvah of shchita. And we even spoke about certain gifts that have to be given to the Kohen from the produce of the animal products, from the shearings of the sheep and the foreleg and the cheeks, etc. And we even spoke about the firstborn animal and the firstborn donkey in particular, and how we do those mitzvot today. This is all volume 1, which we completed pretty much last time. Up until now, we've started, I guess, in Elul. In Elul, so we had a month of Elul, a month of Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet, and then a little bit in Shvat. So about 4 months we've been studying the first volume. What we have now is the next 4 or 5 months, actually, we have till the end of the year to cover volume 2. And I'll just go through a little bit of the list of the topics that we're going to be covering so that you get an overview of what we're going to be discussing in the Laws of Kashrut. A little bit more what you would expect. All those other topics, perhaps being special for the land of Israel or being special for certain times in the land of Israel. Of course, in Elul, I believe we did do some sessions on the mitzvah of Shemitah as well, because we're in the Shemitah year, and that was particularly relevant. So the topics that we're going to be discussing now in the second volume of the Laws of Kashrut. Let's make sure the camera can see that. The first chapter is called, I'll use a different marker. Treifot. Treifot has the word treif in it. It's obviously used, commonly used in people who speak English with a version of Yiddish. And treif is just generic word for something that's not kosher. But originally the term comes from a pasuk in the Torah, which we're going to see again, and it means to be torn, as Moshe said, and it refers to a specific category of laws which have to do with blemishes in the animal, which make it non-kosher. Okay, so when you're slaughtering an animal, it has to be slaughtered kosher, and we talked a little bit about the laws of slaughter, but you have to make sure that the animal itself is healthy and not blemished. So this is what's known as the laws of treifot, very long and detailed, but we're not going to cover all of the details. But in order to understand the difference between kosher meat of the various types, these issues is a sticking point. Don't mind the pun, because part of the issues are that there might be lesions that are stuck to the lungs, which make the animal blemished and so forth. So the issues of treifot is very central for understanding all the rules of kashrut. Okay, that's topic number 1, the first chapter that we're going to cover. You wanted to ask a question, Hirsch?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah, but so I learned that treifah, when you mix with the word tarak, makes tarak by modern Hebrew. Is tarak the original word? Is it mentioned Tanakh and tarak? So
Yes.
Treif is Yiddish and tarak is the original Hebrew.
They all come from the same original Hebrew word, but its usage is commonly for anything non-kosher. But we're going to be using it in terms of from the original halachot in the Torah. There's actually there's the laws of treifot, which refer to these laws of blemishes. different types of blemishes which invalidate an animal for eating.
Let's say somebody kicks chicken in the face and makes a blemish. If this chicken is not Torah,
That's what we're going to learn. What exactly are the laws? What makes a blemish something that's significant halachically? Is it a slap in the face, or perhaps it's a break in his leg, or is it a hole in his lung, and so on and so forth? These are the laws of treifot, which we're going to discuss. But the concept, the word means something torn. That's the original. Litrof means, right? What did Yaakov say? Yaakov, when he was shown the Technicolor dream coat that was dipped in blood, right? And the brothers.
Yeah, they tricked them. Hang on, I'm trying to remember the song.
So it says in Hebrew, as Thomas said very nicely, Yaakov said to himself, Tarof Toraf Yosef. That's this word, treif. Yosef was torn apart by a wild animal. So Yosef was taref. What is he thinking? Yosef's not kosher? What, were they trying to eat him? No, it means he was torn apart. And probably he was attacked by a wild animal, and that's why there's blood on his clothing, and he's been ripped, he's been killed by a lion. And Baruch Hashem turned out to be not so. He lived to tell the tale, or not to tell the tale. That's a whole other question of whether. But Tarof Toraf Yosef, that's the first usage, but there's other usages where the Torah is, we're going to see it in just a few minutes, in the Psukim themselves. Okay, the next thing to be discussed is the laws of two prohibitions in the Torah, which are parts of the animal, which are not kosher. One is called the Gid ha-nasheh. Nasheh means moved. And this also goes back from a pasuk in the Torah that Yaakov had a fight with an angel, apparently, and he was injured in the sinew in his thigh. And so from that day on, the Torah says the Jewish people don't eat this particular sinew in the thigh of the animals that we eat. And that's the Gid ha-nasheh, is a forbidden part of the animal. We'll discuss exactly what it is. People have mentioned it before. Filet mignon is problematic because of that. And there's a second part of the animal which is forbidden. And here it's important that I'm using the English spelling so you can understand the word. Don't confuse that. In Hebrew, it has chet lamed bet. But chet lamed bet, how do you usually read that? Usually it's said as chalav, which is milk. That's another chapter. Later on, we're going to talk about the rules of what makes kosher milk. But here we're talking about chaylev. It's with a tzereh, two tzerehs. Chaylev, two dots underneath the chet and two dots underneath the lamed. And that refers to what?
The fat, the body fat of the
That's right. There's certain fats, not all the fats. All, of course, our meat would not be so tasty. How could you have asado if all fats were forbidden? There's so much fat in there. It's so delicious. And entrecotes as well. There's fats in there. Not all fats is forbidden. There's specific sections of the fats which are forbidden. So the chaylev usually refers to forbidden fats. And that's sure. This is a chet. Chaylev. This is Gid ha-nasheh, and this is treifot. Okay?
So this Gid ha-nasheh is the sinew vein, and
That's right.
is bad fat.
Correct. Forbidden fats, yes. I wouldn't call them bad. Maybe Jews are not allowed to eat them. Non-Jews?
like the rear end down.
I don't think so. No, not at all. No, it's actually there's certain there's certain parts which are there's certain pieces of fat which are defined in certain parts of the animal. I'm not an expert, but we'll learn about them. Okay. They go together with the Gid ha-nasheh. Usually, there's of course that the sinew itself and the fats near the sinew. Some of the fats have to be taken off together with it. Next, the Isur of Dam. Dam, of course, you know from Parshat HaShavua, one of the 10 plagues was the plague of blood. So you're not allowed to eat the blood. We saw some of the verses inside. How do we get the blood out? So there's rules. Salting usually is the method used.
Can you dry it? No, it's still be
Interesting. We're going to learn all the rules.
So there are multiple halachically mutar methods to make an animal without blood.
Correct.
To make a
Correct.
examination.
Primarily two, roasting and salting. Those are primarily the two ways in which we get the blood from outside the meat before we can actually eat it. And dam is blood, right. There's specific rules about different body parts that might have to... Which body parts have the most blood?
Liver.
The liver, that's right. Kaved in Hebrew.
The only one that
Do we bury blood? The blood is buried?
Yeah, but we're already not talking about that blood. That's the blood from the shechita that has to be covered. We mentioned that.
Down the drain? What was...
Covered as you have to take earth and put earth on it.
And the
Yeah,
temple, they had a
we learned
certain
about
door,
that.
yeah? They had a certain exit, like they leave. It's outside the temple walls, right? Or was it there was like a room?
There was lots of blood in the temple, of course, but there's different types of blood. There's blood in, but right now we're talking about the blood that's inside the flesh, inside the meat that has to be removed. The blood of the slaughter, of the blood that comes out of the vein when you slaughter it, that has to be, certain types of animals has to be covered, and other types of animals doesn't have to be covered. We dealt with that last month. The next chapter, the next title heading that we have to do is, we'll just say in colloquial English, bugs. You're not allowed to eat bugs. And how to make sure that you don't have bugs in your food is a modern major issue, sticking point. That's where Rav Melamed is much more lenient than a lot of other rabbis, and we'll point that out when we learn about that. Then there's other types of food which are products from animals. We mentioned milk, but there's also eggs. There's also honey. Good, right? And so that's another chapter we have to talk about. Basically, animal products. And then, finally, after discussing the raw materials and how to get rid them of the forbidden parts, the blood and the fats and the sinews and whatever it is, and you make sure that the animal is healthy, then finally we get to the forbidden mixing of meat and milk. Oh, we've got to watch out for those M&Ms. Okay? This is classic. What everybody thinks about kosher, we got to have mixing. You can't have the drop of chicken falls into your, drop of milk falls into your chicken soup. Rabbi is the kosher.
Wait,
You know.
Isn't the poultry a separate halacha category, at least before 1,000 years ago?
We discussed that about a month ago. We said that there was an opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili that poultry is not considered meat. And we said that it's, even according to the Rambam, he does not paskin like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Chicken is considered to be meat by the Jewish people for about 1,500 years or more. Probably 1,800 years.
And the reason
And so,
because they didn't want to this.
it's rabbinically prohibited. The rabbis made many laws and enactments. Most of our Judaism today is influenced by the enactments of the rabbis. You might have heard of a holiday called Hanukkah. It doesn't say in the Torah that you have to keep Hanukkah. Do you light Hanukkah candles? As a matter of fact, I understand that the symbol of the menorah is the primary symbol of Judaism. You say, oh, the rabbis came up with that one. It's true. We practice rabbinical Judaism. And so for sure, the rabbis also instituted and said that poultry has the status of meat. And for all intents and purposes, it's considered to be meat for Jewish people. Okay, of course, when you get into the nuances, there's significance to what you're saying. It's only rabbinically prohibited. It's not biblically prohibited. When you have questions of doubt or when you have questions of mixing up, that can be significant. It's very important to know the original background and the original laws. But for all intents and purposes, whenever we say meat, from now on in, for the last 1,800 years, we mean chicken is included in meat. Yes?
I learned that my note that different that Yemenites and Sephardic and Ashkenazi put different amounts of time between the time that they eat milk and meat.
It's interesting. That's true, and that's another section that we have to talk about. I believe it's going to be talking. It's going to be here in the mixing meat and milk. One of the ways to separate between them is with the amount of time between eating them, separating them from having any leftovers in your mouth or even in your digestive system, maybe. But that's part of that's a detail of this chapter that we're going to get to. Bezrat Hashem. By all means, and there are different customs in all of these laws. There's different customs between the Sephardim and Ashkenazim. We try to cover it all and mention the major differences. Mostly, we try to mention the 90% of the consensus, and that's what we're focusing on, not the differences, but what is the halacha. Okay? Next chapters, you could say an extension is mixing meat and milk and separation of milk and meat, if you want to put it as a separate sort of chapter. Okay?
Like utensils and everything.
That's right, utensils, exactly. Utensils, waiting. Right. Which word? Mitbach. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters so far. There's more though. And for this, I'm going to have to move the board over so that more people can see. And we'll continue the list over here. The next chapter is the laws of... Okay, so we'll go to number 9 here.
What page is it on?
It's in the table of contents of this book in Hebrew that you don't have.
Oh,
Yeah. The prohibitions of non-Jewish food. Non-Jewish cooking in particular, people are well aware that there is also wine of non-Jews is considered not kosher. Some issues with the bread that's been baked by non-Jews. All the non-Jewish food items is another topic that has to be covered. These are enactments of the rabbis, of course. It doesn't have these in the Torah, and there's actually 2 chapters on that. There's actually 3 chapters on that, because there's an entire chapter about the rules of wine. Fascinatingly, just last week, it became publicized that there's a major change in the way Kashrut is being licensed to regarding these issues, whether not really so much whether a non-Jew touches the wine or handles the wine, but it's actually about whether a non-Shabbat observant Jew touches the wine. And that has been a standard. We consider that to be forbidden. And now there's a new Kashrut organization which is being more lenient about that and saying that even if someone's a secular Jew, it doesn't mean he doesn't believe in God. And so there's room to be lenient if he doesn't actually touch the wine itself. He just, maybe just the bottle, etc., etc.
Or that Arab stocking shelves in grocery stores.
That's a bigger problem. But if it's sealed, we're going to learn about those laws. But in any case, there's practical changes to the laws of Kashrut and everything we've been discussing up to now. Okay, so there's non-Jewish, the rules of non-Jewish produce. There's 3 chapters about that. Then, sorry?
So regarding Jews who not Shomer Shabbat and whatever they make us kosher, there's some people who are, described by the Jews who are Machon as Jews who have den of a boy.
That's right. There's the status of a non-Jew for this issue.
Den of a boy.
Din.
You are a Jew, but you're not Jew.
Only for this issue. For any other issue, they of course they'd save their lives. They would, treat them like a Jew. On Shabbat, they violate the Shabbat in order to save a life of a non-Jew, of a Jew, even if he desecrates the Shabbat. I think that's clear to 99% of the poskim, at least. But regarding the laws of the kashrut of the wine, there's the standard approach is to be more careful about that. Okay, then there's the laws. Chapter 12 is milk and its products, and all the details of cheeses, making cheeses. There's different types of cheese. What about if a non-Jew makes cheese? It's sort of connected many times. This is a major issue in Chutz La'aretz. What we have today, even today, also that we have import of a lot of cheeses. They took off a lot of the regulations much to the chagrin of the milk industry in Israel, the dairy industry in Israel. They used to have a monopoly because, and now they're trying to lower the prices, so they allowed a lot more imports. But then the question is, what kind of supervision do they have over the kosher cheeses? And there's different types of supervision. But so there's a lot to be discussed there. The last few chapters, and then I'll take your questions, there's the laws of mikvah. It's called Tevilat Kelim. Everybody's familiar with mikvah as a body of water in which a menstruating woman has to immerse herself to become permitted against her husband after her cycle. Also, we're familiar with mikvah as its usage for conversion. But believe it or not, there's such a thing as conversion, type of conversion, for a non-Jew's dishes. Dishes that were produced or owned by a non-Jew have to be immersed in the mikvah before they can be used by a Jewish person. And so there's rules of Tevilat Kelim. That's part of making your kitchen kosher, is that the dishes have to be toveld, or immersed in a mikvah. Yes?
If the dishes, let's say a company is Dish Incorporated, right? And it's owned by a Jew, but it's manufactured by a bunch of avodah zarah worshipping Chinese men. Do you have to tumble that? Or is the company's owned by a Jew?
That's exactly what we're going to learn. The short answer is they do not have to be toveld. The ownership is what determines it, not necessarily the factory workers. It's not a question of avodah zarah. We don't assume that the non-Jewish, that the idol worshippers are going to be doing their idol worshiping when they're making a tool, making a dish, a pot. That's usually nothing to do with their worship. And so it's not an issue of idol worship. It's an issue of ownership by Jews. Yeah.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say this mug belongs to me, but it has not been totaled yet. But
Yes.
I'm Jewish.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Could I sell this to another Jew?
Why not?
I would sell it, but would he have to? Would he have to dip it in the mikvah? Because he's purchasing it from a Jew.
But
It was made in China by.
If you,
He already put it in the mikvah.
if
No,
you,
I didn't. I'm saying this I did, but hypothetically, if I didn't, would he have to do it?
Yes. Yes.
But a mug, you have to put in the mikvah because it's
Yes.
only metal.
No, well, there's different, there's the biblical level, and then there's rabbinic law. By rabbinic law, we immerse other types of vessels other than metals and glass.
You cannot take the.
We're going to learn those laws. You're going to find them very interesting and educational. Well, which vessels have to be immersed in the mikvah, in what circumstances. The next is basically when you have, up till here, we haven't really talked about how to correct kashrut problems. The next part is chapter 14, 15, and 16 deal with correcting problems. What kind of problems could there be?
Let's say you had a meat knife and you used it for dairying or the opposite.
That's right. When you have, of course, the mixing, if it does get mixed, can it be kosherized? And basically it's the rules of koshering, making kosher a kitchen. Let's say you have an oven and it was used with non-kosher food. Can you kosher the oven? We use the term as a verb, to kosher, to make it kosher. Is there a way? That's correcting. That's using koshering as a corrective activity. So there's rules of how to do that in a kitchen, all the different elements of the kitchen. Then there's the rules of, mixtures, which mixtures, in what proportion make things prohibited and so forth. And then there's the issue of when you have taste, which gets absorbed in the different types of vessels. And there's a lot of rules on that. So really, when you most people think about you have to learn the rules of kosher, they focus in on mixing meat and milk. Everybody knows about that, and the separation between them, and how to correct when you don't have dishes that were properly dealt with, or you have non-kosher food which got mixed into your dishes. That's it. As you can see, there's a lot of other topics to cover besides the milk and meat and the forbidden mixtures. Last 3 chapters, which are very important, which we're going to cover, chapters 17, 18, and 19, is 17 is things which were forbidden by the Talmud as non-kosher because they're dangerous. Now,
Like, onion overnight, something like that, right?
that's one example. Most common example, and we were asked about this the other day, was mixing meat and fish.
And my macaroni, the salt.
Also, my machronim, we talked about that. Right? So there's a few things which are forbidden for danger. Of course, what if we think the science has changed? These things are not dangerous anymore. Yes?
Why is meat and fish dangerous?
So the Talmud believed that eating meat and fish was bad for your health.
I thought fish was parv.
A what?
I thought fish was parv or something.
Oh, it's not.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. That's why it's very surprising. It doesn't fit into the other laws because it's not forbidden. It's not considered milk. So meat and milk are forbidden. We have to define milk and we have to define meat. But fish does neither. And therefore, should be no problem with it. But there is a problem with having fish and meat together. The Talmud speaks about it as a problem of danger. Health danger.
But
Yes.
what difference does it make when we eat it? Like first we eat fish, and like 15 minutes later we eat the meat.
I think the danger
Correct.
was having
That's allowed.
bulk
Only
fish.
so we have to define exactly what was forbidden by the Talmud and why and how we can apply that nowadays. Nowadays, most scientists assume that there's no danger of actually eating a piece of fish together with a piece of meat and swallowing them and digesting them at the same time. I have not heard of any modern science backing up the Talmud's assertions about that. And yet we try to keep the mitzvot of the Talmud. Maybe they meant some kind of spiritual danger. We don't know. So, but we have to know the parameters to try to, at least in the minimal amount, keep those laws as well. But of course, it makes a big difference that if modern science doesn't consider it dangerous, that may make a difference when you come to questions of doubt or questions of how strict you have to be and so forth. So there's ramifications for that. Just say the last 2 chapters, and then we'll take your questions. And that is, of course, the impact of industrialization. How do I spell that? industry, the industrialization of the food industry makes a lot of differences. There's questions which come up with all sorts of additives and subtractives? No, there's no subtractives. What's additives and preservatives? And the last one, of course, is supervision. The rule of supervision and trustworthiness. Supervision. Who is considered to be trustworthy? So you ask somebody, "Is this kosher?" He says, "It's kosher. Can you eat it?" These are the laws. So this is pretty much the map of what we're going to be doing in the following 19 chapters. Bezrat Hashem, this semester, till the end of the year, till the summer. It's great stuff. This is lots of heavy classic Torah learning. As I said, the most classic, of course, is the mixing of the meat and the milk and how to kasher. Everybody knows before Pesach, we kasher our kitchens from the chametz. There's lots of rules, but all these other, it's all based on, you have to know the basic laws of kosher regarding animal products, the blood, the bugs, the forbidden animals. For the first part, all these laws of non-Jews, Jewish cooking, and that's our plan for the coming months. Now I'll take some questions, or we'll call it a day.
So regarding the materials of the pots, pans, utensils, whatever that are used on milk and meat, this is only if they can actually absorb it. It's like stainless steel, does it say fly?
Exactly, those are good questions, all to be discussed here. About which type of vessels absorb taste, how much taste, how does taste get absorbed, hot, cold, lots of sharp objects, sharp foods that have some acid in it.
One last question.
Yeah.
Well, let's say you have like a large amount of, let's say, soup. It's meat, stew or whatever, and one drop of milk goes into it. Is the whole thing ruined, or are you allowed?
Wow, I've never heard that question before. It's like the classic, Rabbi, a drop of milk dropped into my chicken soup. What do I do? Wow. Like,
or what about a not kosher food?
This is what I studied for a year. This is a classic rabbi question. What happens? Most rabbis, they finish their rabbinic training and they go into the community and they're waiting to get a question like that. Rabbi, a drop of milk fell into my chicken soup. What is the first question they usually get? My son is becoming homosexual. My daughter wants a sex change. What do I do about the reforming conservative movement? How do I deal with the, there's so many, end of life, can I donate my organs? What?
Yes.
Where's the classic laws of Kashrut? So it's actually refreshing here and there to actually discuss the basic questions of law.
The Rav has still not answered my question about the
It's true. It's true. It's true. We have to stop here.
You consume